It's humid.
It's uncomfortable.
Not good.
I need like crisp fall weather to wake me up.
Yeah.
And
we're waiting for the crispiness. That's when fall really hits.
Exactly.
Not great baseball weather.
No.
As the Orioles are wrapping up their regular season here this week. They have 2 more games against the Tampa Bay Rays here at Camden Yards as we are doing this podcast on Wednesday morning, and then they will travel to New York for their final 3-game series of the season as the year wraps up on Sunday. We are going to wrap things up for the regular season here on the Bird's Nest today. Going to try to put a bow on things as best we can. First, though, we are going to talk about some awards which were just handed out over the past few days. One that was quite literally, 2, I suppose, that were just handed out about 5 minutes ago that we're going to talk about as well. But we're going to start with Trevor Rogers, who wins the most valuable Oriole. He was both of our votes for most valuable Oriole. If you missed our podcast on who we voted for MVO, was that last week? Week before?
Might have been the week before.
I think it was the week before. Anyway, go back, listen to that podcast. We laid out all of our arguments as to why we thought Trevor Rogers was the most valuable Oriole this season, and it seems as if the rest of the media members covering the Orioles agreed, because Trevor Rogers was anointed MVO, a 1.35 ERA and 17 starts. It is a ridiculous season. We have talked about Rogers a lot over the past few weeks, deservedly so. It is the best ERA, that 1.35, in the divisional era since 1969 among pitchers with at least 17 starts in a season, better than Doc Gooden in 85 and Greg Maddux, in 94 and 95. It's too good of a season not to reward, and he is now rewarded for it.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy. I mean, we talked about it, I guess, 2 weeks ago that it could really go either way between Gunnar Henderson, Trevor Rogers, and we wouldn't have been upset if it went either way. It wasn't like we were really dead set on, okay, Gunnar Henderson needs to be most valuable Oriole in 2025 as opposed to Trevor Rogers. But you and I both voted Trevor Rogers is number one, and I think that was the general consensus, especially at least among the media, that Gunnar Henderson and Trevor Rogers were the surefire 1 and 2. And then number 3 was very much a toss-up, which we kind of see in the results. There were votes for Tony Mansolino, Dean Kramer, Dylan Carlson, Dylan Beavers, you name it. But I think that when someone has a season as historic as Trevor Rogers right now, and even though he came in late May, then you still have to acknowledge something like that, whether that is through a most valuable player award or anything else. I am very, very happy for Trevor Rogers, just given everything that he's accomplished this year, and especially when you know where he was last year. Yeah,
and I think our votes just kind of boiled down to the fact that when you are looking at the word value, who on this team, when they stepped on the baseball field, gave you the best chance to win that baseball game? And I think this year it was undoubtedly Trevor Rogers. Other guys receiving votes, Tony Mansolino. Didn't know that managers could receive votes for this award, but Tony Mansolino, the intern skipper, gets a vote. Dylan Beavers gets a vote, even though he played 30 games. Dylan Carlson received a vote. I would imagine it's a vote. It's nothing against Dylan Carlson, just a little surprising there. Colton Cowser, Gunnar Henderson, Jackson Holliday, Dean Kramer, Tomoyuki Sugano, and Jordan Westberg, other players receiving votes. As we mentioned on our MVO podcast, we both had Gunnar Henderson at number 2 in our MVO voting. I had Jackson Holliday at number 3. You had Jordan Westberg at number 3. I had Dean Kramer and Jordan Westberg in my honorable mentions. Tomoyuki Sugano, another player that has just posted every 5th day for the Orioles this year, and that level of stability was admirable for a team that did not have a lot of it this year. But Rogers, we don't know what the specific votes are. We are just told who wins and who else received votes. It seems as if Rogers was the general consensus for that number 1 overall vote.
Yeah, no, I think, and even press release too, when they state all the stats that Trevor Rogers has broken or made this year, it's really, really incredible. He's the 4th left-handed pitcher in franchise history since 1954 to win the award. He at least as of yesterday, among all MLB starters with a minimum of 100 innings pitched, he was first in ERA, opponent average first with 178. First in hits allowed per 9 innings with just over 5. First in home runs allowed per 9 innings with less than or a quarter of a home run, technically. And then first in base runners allowed per 9 innings and second in whip with below 900. So it's just like incredible what he has done this year.
Yeah, amazing season out of Trevor Rogers. Again, if you want to hear some more about why we made that decision to vote for him, then make sure you go back and check out our podcast. A couple of awards that were just handed down literally 5 minutes ago, as this is the beauty of live podcasting. FCL Orioles manager Christian Frias, honored by the Orioles. Area scout Rich Amaral, recognized for his contribution to the organization. And then we find out that Nate George has been awarded as the club's top minor league player, and right-handed pitcher Trey Gibson the club's top minor league pitcher. Unbelievable season out of Nate George. He is somebody that we have tried to highlight this year. Went down and got the chance to talk to him in Aberdeen. A 16th round pick last year. Starts the season with those FCL Orioles. Lights the world on fire. OPS over 1,000. Gets promoted quickly to Delmarva. Plays 43 games there. Hits .337 with a .901 OPS. Gets promoted again. Gets up to Aberdeen, where he just started there in his age 19 season, but a .291 batting average and a .773 OPS. Overall in the season for George, it's 87 games, a .337 batting average, and .896 OPS. He stole 50 bags as well. Outstanding season out of Nate George, who has propelled himself into consideration as a top 10 Orioles prospect.
Yeah, really excited to see what Nate George accomplishes next year, especially when he gets promoted to Double-A, because I feel like that's a pretty good test to see where players are, and we've seen a lot of them like Enrique Bradfield Jr., Dylan Beavers, Judd Fabian kind of show out in Double-A and obviously before making it to Triple-A. But really, really impressive stuff from Nate George. I think that this is a guy where you look forward to kind of seeing what he becomes. I mean, he's an elite athlete, track runner in high school, and you can totally tell where that comes from, the speed, the energy, whether that's on defense or on the base paths, like you mentioned. So I think that this is a really, really exciting prospect, especially just given how late in the draft he was drafted,
right?
And what he's been able to become.
Super high upside for Nate George. He is an outstanding athlete that is figuring out the baseball thing, and I think we are seeing that in his progression. Still got a ways to go. I would imagine he probably starts next year in High A Aberdeen as well. Well, excuse me, High A will be, Frederick at this point then?
Yeah.
Believe. Yeah, so it'll be High A.
So some differences next year.
He's going to start next year in High A, but a really, really outstanding season from him. And then minor league pitcher of the year goes to Trey Gibson. Was a .426 ERA on the season, but you got to look at the peripheral numbers for Trey Gibson. Strikes out 12.5 batters per 9 innings. Another guy who was a quick riser this year. 9 games in High A Aberdeen. I know the 5.12 ERA there is not an outstanding number, but you got to look at the other numbers. 15.5 Ks per 9 innings, a whip just under 1,200. Then he goes to Chesapeake Double-A, absolutely dominates. 10 games, 1.55 ERA, 12 Ks per 9, a whip of 0.898. And then 7 games in AAA Norfolk. Didn't super impress there, but he's getting his feet wet in a much higher level of competition. It is a big jump from AA to AAA. So Trey Gibson, somebody who I think we started this year with Gibson in the conversation with guys like Michael Ferret and Nestor Herman, and there was kind of a middle tier of Orioles pitching prospects that we looked at and said, okay, there's some upside there. They might be a back end of the rotation guy if everything goes well. Trey Gibson, I think, separated himself a little bit from that group. Granted, a lot of that group had really, really good seasons, and I think there are probably a lot of those guys that could have been in consideration for this award. But Trey Gibson getting up to AAA Norfolk, I know the numbers there weren't outstanding, but he has flashed a ton of upside and could be the best pitching prospect in this organization. And
just like we've talked about this at length on previous podcasts, but just the way that the farm system has shaped from the beginning of the season to right now. Yes, you got a lot of new depth at the trade deadline and at the draft, but also with guys that were already internally here. like Nestor Herman, Levi Wells, guys that like have already made a huge jump throughout this season. Trey Gibson, Herman, Levi Wells, all at AAA to start 2026 is going to be huge. So really, really excited to kind of see where you have these guys who, like you mentioned, were kind of middle tier pitchers who have jumped up to be potentially big name guys at spring training and just moving forward as they get more reps at AAA.
Yeah, and I think there's a possibility we could see Trey Gibson at some point next season.
Yeah.
Assuming he starts the year in AAA Norfolk. If he has a nice season to start next year, he could be a potential piece of the rotation. So congratulations to Nate George, Trey Gibson. Those guys are the Orioles minor league player of the year and minor league pitcher of the year, respectively. All right, Annie, let's get into our kind of end of season breakdown here as the Orioles have 5 games remaining. It's funny. I think last night's game against the Rays kind of puts a funny bow on what we are going to talk about here, which is the fact that you had an awesome lineup last night. It was one of the most exciting lineups of the season. Holiday, Westberg, Henderson, O'Neill, Beavers, Rutschman, Basayo, Kauser, Mayo, with Dean Kramer pitching. You can make an argument that that's the most fun starting 9 that the Orioles have had this season, with those guys healthy, quote unquote, as healthy as this team has looked in a while. And it comes with 5 games remaining in the season. And they dominate that game yesterday, and you can't help but wonder what this team would have looked like if they were able to run that lineup out for the last 2 months.
I know. And it's so hard to kind of take that approach too, where you look back at the season and think, oh, what could have been?
Yeah.
Because that is kind of the epitome of last night's lineup, is like, oh, this is what it was intended or could have been.
Yep.
Obviously, you probably weren't going to get the promotions of Basayo and Beavers early on in the season, and we know that. But still, it is a really, really strong look at what could be for next year. I would even slot in Jeremiah Jackson into that equation as well, maybe kind of rotating a little bit with Tyler O'Neill should he pick up the club option, or should the club. So I think that with this lineup 1 through 9, and you also add Jeremiah Jackson into the equation, whether that's in the infield or whether that's in the outfield as well, I think that is very, very good and solid look for the foundation of what it'll be next year.
Yeah, and it's important too that, Jeremiah Jackson, while he wasn't in the starting lineup yesterday, I think that speaks to the quality of the lineup that you are able to put out when guys like Jeremiah Jackson and Ryan Mountcastle are not included in that starting 9, but you could potentially see them as rotational pieces for next year. You mentioned Tyler O'Neill. He's got the player option for next season. The presumption is that he is going to pick that up and return to the team for 2026. And we will do plenty of looking ahead to 2026. That is probably going to be for next week's podcast. I think kind of the discussions that we were going to have this week, it's going to be okay, here's what happened. And then next week we'll do here's where the Orioles go from here. But as you kind of mentioned, it is hard and disappointing in a way to look at last night's lineup and see what this Orioles team could have been and lament on this 2025 season a little bit, because there's no way around the fact that this has been a disappointing year for the Orioles. They will finish with a record below 500. It's going to be their first losing season since 2021, their first time missing the playoffs since 2022 after making it the past 2 seasons. You had 2 position players play 100 games. Adley Rutschman and Colton Kauser, Jordan Westberg, they were all in the lineup last night. They are all going to finish right around that 85 to 90 games played mark, which is roughly 55% of the season. Grayson Rodriguez didn't pitch. Zach Eflin appeared in 14 games. Felix Bautista appeared in 35. Things did not go to plan.
Yeah.
I think you can see that as evidenced by the fact that, look at your offseason moves, right? Alex Jackson played in more games than Gary Sanchez. Dylan Carlson played in more games than Tyler O'Neill. That indicates to me that the offseason did not go as planned, at least the results that you were hoping to get out of that offseason. It is a difficult season to evaluate, given all of those things that I just mentioned. And, I don't know if this is a comparison that a lot of our Ravens Orioles fans are going to like, but it reminds me of when your quarterback is hurt in football. I know it's different, but it brings to mind like the Bengals of this year, where Joe Burrow is out.
Yeah.
He's out for the next, 3 months, probably. There are other question marks on that team. How good is the offensive line? There are defensive issues. But you looked at the Bengals going into the season and you thought, okay, that's probably a playoff team. They are at least going to be in the hunt. They are going to be in the mix. And then Joe Burrow gets hurt, and it's like, okay, well, Joe Burrow's hurt, so there goes the season. And it's different. I know the quarterback is a much more important position and has its hands in a lot of, different ways that the game is impacted versus just a specific baseball player being injured. But when you look at the fact that you have been missing Adley Rutschman, Jordan Westberg, Colton Cowser for about half the year, and all three of those guys were not penciled in as all-stars, but they were three players that certainly had all-star potential. Adley and Westberg were last year, and you were expecting a big leap out of Colton Cowser this season. You don't have Grayson Rodriguez. You have Zach Eflin for half the starts that you were expecting. You don't have Felix Bautista. You make all the moves at the deadline. And so, there are other question marks where with the Bengals, you can look at the offensive line. You can look at the defense. With the Orioles, you can look at different issues that persisted. The fact that some of the young core had down seasons. Adley Rutschman and Colton Cowser struggled a little bit. Gunnar Henderson's power production took a big step back. Zach Eflin struggled when he was on the field. There are those sorts of question marks that you can certainly look at and say, okay, do these things need to get addressed and fixed, and how does that impact the team this year and moving forward? But also, how do you evaluate this team when the guys aren't on the field? How do you evaluate the Bengals without Joe Burrow?
No, I mean, I think it's a valid alignment, especially because you kind of look at it as a domino effect as well, because it's like, you could say like the Bengals were going to be in playoff contention, a really strong team that's going to match up with the rest of the teams in that division. But you kind of look at it and like, okay, they have a chance, then Joe Burrow gets injured, and then it's a little bit of a domino effect, which I think is what you can also align to the Orioles.
And it's like there goes the season in a way, right? The Orioles had to use a record-breaking amount of players this year.
And then it's like, okay, Joe Burrow falls to injury. What other gaping holes are there on this team?
It magnifies everything else.
100%. And I think that it's the same way with the Orioles. Obviously, it's a little bit different when you can evaluate it, because it's not like you can look at a specific O-line group or a defensive, a secondary or whatnot, because with the Orioles, it's like more so as a unit. Yes, you can look at the infield and the outfield, but at the same time, you're also looking offensively, runners in scoring position, or batting up against left-handers, which are two areas of focus that the Orioles really, really became gaping holes of issues and areas of need in the beginning of the season when we saw injuries like Jordan Westberg. Okay, you lose Jordan Westberg, you lose one of your best clutch hitters and a guy, even though he had reverse splits to go up against as a righty bat against a left-handed pitcher. So it's things like that when you look at, okay, this injury happens, this one happens. It's not one major guy like a Joe Burrow injury, but it reveals the gaps of where things are needed.
Yeah, and baseball is different in the fact that a lot of the guys in the lineup are playing a bit more independently than they would in football. It's not literally a quarterback throwing a ball to a wide receiver. Of course, Jamar Chase is going to be worse with Jake Browning than Joe Burrow. But you can even make that case with Adley Rutschman being injured for as long as he was. Tony Mansolino said it last night. It's no surprise Adley Rutschman comes back, and then all of a sudden Dean Kramer has an outstanding start where he's super efficient, and that has to do with Adley Rutschman because he is an outstanding defensive catcher that calls a good game. When you have the 9 guys in the lineup that you were hoping to have at the beginning of the season, yes, they are taking independent at-bats, but a lineup flows into each other.
Yeah.
There's a reason that you construct a lineup in a certain way and just don't throw guys here and there willy-nilly. A lineup has a flow. A lineup has momentum. A lineup feels different when you have specific guys in there. Guys get more at-bats. They get more opportunities. They are on with runners in scoring position. You can even look at it from a pitching perspective as well. When you look around baseball, it's funny to see that some of the better pitchers in baseball tend to have some of the best run support in baseball. Look at the Orioles this season. Who's the pitcher that gets the most run support during games on average? Trevor Rogers.
Yeah.
Because I think there's something to be said for the fact that when Trevor Rogers is on the mound, there is a mentality that you have a better chance to go out and win that baseball game.
Yeah.
And with the amount of injuries that the Orioles have had too, we're not inside the minds of every single player in that clubhouse, but you've got to be discouraged.
Right.
Sitting in there every day knowing that you don't have the guys that are supposed to be the core foundation of this baseball team day in and day out. Again, talked about Adley Rutschman and Jordan Westberg and Colton Cowser finishing this season with 85, 90 games played. That's going to be third best on the team.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of games.
Right. Third
best in terms of games played for a position player this year is going to be a guy that missed half the season.
Yeah. And it's just like the chemistry has changed so much this year.
Yeah.
Whether that's at the trade deadline, whether that's just with guys falling to injury. I mean, you also mentioned kind of the flow of the lineup. I mean, we often go towards Jordan Westberg, Adley Rutschman, those injuries, Colton Cowser, but there's also the Ryan Mountcastle injury.
Sure.
Ryan O'Hearn getting traded at the deadline, which you didn't necessarily expect you would have to do. Sure, he was an expiring contract player, but at the same time, you would have thought at the beginning of 2025 that you would be able to hold on to him if you were to make a playoff push. But okay, Ryan Mountcastle gets injured, you deal away Ryan O'Hearn. Sure, that's great. You get a lot more opportunities for Kobe Mayo at first base, and he's made a lot of progress there, working his butt off day in, day out at first base. But at the same time, it's a learning curve. And so you have a whole new kind of chemistry in the lineup, which is great that he got those reps to be able to be there for 2026 and ready to go off the bat. But it's just different.
Yeah, this team was not constructed in the offseason with the mindset that they wouldn't have Ryan O'Hearn, Ramon Laureano, Cedric Mullins, Ramon Arias, all of the bullpen guys in the second half of the season, because they were built this offseason to compete down the stretch into the playoffs. That's why you trade last year for relievers like Sir Anthony Dominguez, who had a wealth of playoff experience and was an outstanding playoff bullpen arm. That's why you go out in the offseason and you sign somebody like Andrew Kittredge, and you have the faith that, you know, a veteran arm like that is going to help lead you into the playoffs. This is not a team that was constructed to win in the second half of the season without the guys that they ultimately had to deal away at the deadline, because that is what made sense from a baseball perspective at the time.
Yeah, and it's impossible to kind of predict how an offseason is going to play or how successful it will be. Sure, you can say, okay, we went out and acquired X, Y, and Z in terms of our needs, and we fell short a little bit in this need, as opposed to like, okay, we have checked all the boxes on all of our needs. We're doing really well. Injuries will happen. You can't predict how that's going to happen. You can use Corbin Burnes and Anthony Santander as a perfect example. You went out, tried to put in a bid for those two free agents at expensive contracts, and you were right up there with the Diamondbacks for Corbin Burnes, just a bit of a differently structured contract, but both of them are injured. Right. Corbin Burnes, season-ending injury. Anthony Santander has played 50 games for Toronto this year. You can never have been able to predict that. You go out, get them. Sure, things could have been different if they stayed in Baltimore. Who knows? But the same goes for getting a guy like Tyler O'Neill, which, yes, who has had a ton of injury history, but also Andrew Kittredge, you would never have been able to expect that he would start the season with surgery.
Right.
Or vice versa with some other guys. It's just very difficult to be able to predict how your offseason moves are going to shake out at the end of the day. Sure, you can kind of make sure you hit on all of your needs, and I think that that's going to be really huge for the Orioles this coming offseason, but you will never be able to predict injuries. And I know that sounds like a cop-out for the way that the 2025 season has gone for the Orioles, but it plays a huge role.
Yeah, and I think we get the comment a lot, and I understand it, that, you know, you can't blame injuries for everything. At the same time, the Orioles have tied the Major League record for number of players used in a single season at 70.
Yeah.
As mentioned, it is not the only thing to blame. There are, you know, some core guys on this Orioles team that have not had the seasons that they wanted to, whether that is being able to stay on the field or when they are on the field, just not putting up the kind of production that they want to. You can't go 18-34 in April and May. The Orioles have been a pretty good baseball team since then. They went 16-11 in June, 13-12 in July. That's a 29-23 record going into the deadline. a .558 winning percentage. If you had that winning percentage for the entire season, you win 91 games, which is on pace with the 2024 Orioles. But you start the season 16 games under 500, and you dig yourself a hole that you can't dig out of. But what happened in June and July to have a .558 winning percentage? It's pretty simple. It's the core of this baseball team playing good baseball. From June 1st to July 31st, Gunnar hit .319 with an .892 OPS in 52 games. Westberg in 34 games hit .311 with a .900 OPS. Adley Rutschman only played 18 games, but he hit .309 with an .879 OPS. Tyler O'Neill only played 16 games, but he hit .259 with 5 homers and a .932 OPS. Kobe Mayo had a .752 OPS. Colton Cowser had a .724 OPS. Trevor Rogers had a .171 ERA. Kramer had a .379. Morton a .398. Felix a .113. Dominguez a .133. Aiken .346. Kittredge .362. Soto .363. The guys that you brought in to have good seasons had good seasons. The core of this baseball team was good. You were a good baseball team for those 2 months.
Yeah.
Hard to evaluate what this team was after the trade deadline because Laureano, O'Hearn, Mullins, the bullpen guys, Charlie Morton, those players were supposed to be here in the second half of the season. And so it's hard to evaluate August and September knowing that. It's weird. I hate to keep saying it's hard to evaluate this. It's hard to evaluate that. But you know what the Orioles' expectations were this offseason, going into 2025. It was to make the playoffs and to take a step up from where you had been in 2023 and 2024, which was making the playoffs and getting bounced early. The expectation was that you could take a step up from that. And the season went so drastically off the rails so early that it changed everything that you needed to do at the deadline. Obviously, it changed the entire outlook so quickly. And it was such a drastic 180 from what the outlook in the offseason was that it's almost hard to get calibrated to an evaluation of what this team is because it is so different than what it was supposed to be 8 months ago.
Well, also, I think the only way you really can evaluate after the trade deadline is how the new guys have played. Like, I really don't think that you can evaluate all that much of, okay, these were the expectations in the beginning of the season. Now here we are after a trade deadline, which we didn't
the
expect.
Expectations at that point are gone. You're evaluating this team in August and September based on the players that you have and not based on the expectations that you had for this team going into 2025.
And you're evaluating it on guys that you didn't expect to be here at the beginning of the season who will likely play an impact in 2026. Jeremiah Jackson, you would never expected him to make the impact that he's made. Kobe Mayo, yes, you would have expected and wanted him to make that impact, but he's still getting so much better. He's playing phenomenally in September right now, so you would like him to go out with a bang. It's just right now.
Dylan Beavers wouldn't have gotten this playing time.
Yeah. So I think it's just the only way you can evaluate after the trade deadline is what you have. And I think that we talked about that months ago of like, how can we still measure an Orioles season with success? And the biggest part was, okay, what's done is done. You know, the expectations are out the window, but here's the only thing that you can move forward with. And that's the only way you can kind of evaluate what's going on since then. I just want to point out that there's a comment on YouTube saying you should have traded Mountcastle and Rutschman and Bautista. I disagree. I mean, we've said this. You went on a rant about this a long time ago, or not even that long ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, that Rutschman is intended to be your starting catcher in 2026, as it was intended to be, and you're going to milk every year he has in his contract left, especially because of how good of a catcher he is. Sure, his offensive numbers haven't been there, but it was never going to happen.
If you want to trade Adley Rutschman, you don't want to be a competitive baseball team.
Yeah.
That's kind of the only takeaway if you're an Orioles fan with a take of getting rid of a catcher that, yes, had a down season offensively, but it gets praised up and down for his defensive growth by his interim manager, by every single pitcher that works with him.
Every single Trevor Rogers start.
Every single Trevor Rogers start. I mean, Adley Rutschman, I have confidence that he will be able to bounce back next season, even if it's not to the extent of an 800-plus OPS that we saw from him in 22 and 23. A bounce back for Adley Rutschman is at least, I think, an OPS right around 750. If it's in a league average OPS, a good on-base percentage for a switch-hitting catcher that plays great defense, that's a really valuable asset to have on your team. It's also a valuable asset to help somebody like Samuel Pasayo grow behind the plate. So there are some takes that are just non-starters conversation-wise, and Adley Rutschman being a player that you're just like, whatever, trade him. That's a non-starter for a conversation.
Yeah.
But it's weird, Annie. I feel like over the last few days and week or so, knowing that today was going to be a podcast where we are trying to wrap up our thoughts on the 2025 season, I'm still grappling with it. And even as I am going through my notes here and having an idea of what I wanted to say on this podcast, I am still grappling with it because logically, I know I've talked about this before in episodes in the past, but I understand what the Orioles were doing this offseason. I know there was a thought of, hey, let's go take a big swing. Reportedly, they did to try to go get Corbin Burns. Yeah. And again, you want to talk about injuries that you can't predict. Corbin Burns, unfortunately, goes down for the season and needs Tommy John surgery. But when you didn't go get Corbin Burns in the offseason, you went for the depth pieces in Charlie Morton and Tomoyuki Sugano to solidify this back end of the starting rotation, assuming that you would have a healthy Grayson Rodriguez and a healthy Zach Eflin, which you did not. Now, when Grayson Rodriguez gets hurt in spring training, there's certainly an argument to be made there that, hey, maybe you needed to make another move in the starting rotation. But that plan pitching-wise made sense to me, where if Morton and Sugano got off to a good start to the season, Charlie Morton obviously did not. If they just have solid first few months there, you get to the trade deadline, and then you say, okay, let's make a move for a starting pitcher, as the Orioles have done in the past, acquiring Zach Eflin, acquiring Trevor Rogers. You go out and do that. Let's say Trevor Rogers still has the bounce-back season that he has this year. Kyle Bradish comes back in September. In a hypothetical world where Grayson Rodriguez is healthy, you have him. And if you're winning baseball games, you're not dealing Zach Eflin, at the deadline. Maybe you're not dealing Morton either, but you're certainly not dealing a combination of those two. And so you get to September and you have Eflin, Rodriguez, a front-end starter that you traded for, Bradish, Rogers, Kramer. Yeah. You have plenty of options there. Tyler O'Neill was unbelievable for the Red Sox last season. I know he's a player that has had injury history in the past, but if you had Tyler O'Neill healthy and available, he is a player that was going to help you in a big way. And hopefully he still does. If Tyler O'Neill sticks around in Baltimore, kind of seems like the trend of his career is one season where he's injured, one season where he's great. So maybe next season you get him the season where he's great. But that was a guy that hit 31 homers for the Red Sox last year. That was certainly going to help. And that wasn't even
playing all 162 either.
Right. And that was certainly going to help in the middle of the lineup.
Yeah.
And so the offseason to me, that vision made sense, even if it wasn't an offseason that you look at and say, okay, I wanted them to make this move or this move or this move. If they didn't make that particular move, it's still moves that you looked at and went, all right, they're in a good spot.
Yeah.
And then things just changed so drastically that it was hard to wrap your head around.
I mean, I completely agree. I think that when you look at those offseason moves, and if all had gone according to plan, if Andrew Kittredge wasn't injured from the start, if Grayson Rodriguez wasn't injured from the start, it all made so much sense. And if, I know you were making a gamble on Tomoyuki Sugano because it was his first season in Major League Baseball, but he started out really well. If Charlie Morton had swapped how he played for the Orioles with how he ended as an Oriole as opposed to how he started as an Oriole, you would be in so different of a position than you are. And I think that for me, I'm not necessarily looking at 2025 and trying to figure out what happened, because everyone knows what happened. There was underperformance and there were a ton of injuries.
Yep.
That's what happened. But the way that I'm trying to wrap up 2025 is by forecasting for 2026, because you are in a very different position. You have guys that just came back from injury in Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells, who played really, really well in their returns back from major surgeries. You have Trevor Rogers, who was the most dominant pitcher in baseball and should be considered for AL Cy Young. And then you also hopefully get Grayson Rodriguez back. And who knows if Tyler Wells is going to be a bullpen piece or whatnot. But even just with Tyler Wells, hopefully Albert Suarez, however that shakes out. Guys like Chase McDermott, Cade Povich, you have a lot more depth already than you were last year because it was guys like Chase McDermott, who's obviously still trying to prove himself in the big leagues, but Cade Povich, they were the depth pieces. Trevor Rogers was a depth piece who was injured. But going into 2026, you also have elite minor league arms in AAA who are still trying to make a little bit stronger of a push. Obviously, they haven't been there for that long, but that is a much better sign of depth than you had going into 2025. Plus offseason moves, I think that the starting rotation, if all goes according to plan in terms of the depth that you have, the guys who have performed really, really well in the starting rotation in 2025 and towards the end of 2025, and then you go out and hit a bunch of needs in the offseason with somewhat the same spending that they hit in 2025, which flies under the radar in total amount of spending, then I think you are in a much better position than last year.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point to bring up. Your first point there, too, there's not a question of what happened in 2025. It's injuries and underperformance.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
We can talk about how many injuries there were. We can talk about the specific guys that underperformed here and there. There were injuries, there were underperformance. You can't have both of those things and have a good baseball season. You can't have the extent of injuries that the Orioles had. You can't have the extent of underperformance that the Orioles had. It's not going to be a good year. You're left with a weird feeling, though, because you know what this team was supposed to be. You know what they did in 23 and 24, and you know the potential that they have in 2026. And I'm sure this will be a topic of conversation, too, for next week as we look ahead to the offseason and what the Orioles could do, what moves they need to make, and what the 2026 season could look like. But do you feel better about 2026 than you thought you would, given how the season has gone? Do you feel better about 2026 than you thought you would entering 2025? I think the obvious answer is no, just because of the record and obviously how the season went. But there is also an argument to be made. I don't think you feel better about 2026 than you would have if 2025 went better than it did. But I do think there are aspects to this that make you at least feel encouraged about 2026, if not more so than where you were before. I don't think it's more.
It is a really difficult question to answer because it's like how you felt about going into 2025. You felt good. You had your core still intact. Adley Rutschman looked really good in spring training. Guys were getting another year under their belt. They've had, at least the core had now had 2 poor playoff appearances where you wanted to bounce back from and try and make another run, and you felt really good. But you had lost guys to free agency like Corbin Burns, Anthony Santander, other big names that you tried to fill holes from in the offseason. And you're like, okay, the offseason moves have been made. People were iffy about them, if it was going to work out, if it wasn't. But going into 2026, you're like, well, the expectations were set. They were set in 2025 and they should have been met. 2026 is a very different story because now you have the chance to exceed those lower expectations.
But even in 26 too, I mean, Trevor Rogers is not somebody that you had in your 2026 plans entering this season.
Oh my gosh, no.
Trevor Rogers entering 2025 was a fringe rotation piece. Entering 2026, he is a front end of the rotation starting pitcher in the conversation to potentially get an opening day start, whether that's him or Kyle Bradish or somebody that you bring in the offseason. Dylan Beavers was not in the starting outfield in 2026 conversation entering this season, because entering this season, he had just gotten to AAA Norfolk to end 2024. He had 6 or 7 games there. He was pretty good for AA in 2024. And then in 2025, you had to see if he was going to be able to figure out that level. He did, and more than that, obviously. He comes up to the big leagues and has a really, really strong final 30, maybe 35 games here to end the year. So Dylan Beavers, all of a sudden, is a big part of your 2026 calculation. Is he a starting outfielder next year? I don't know. I think there's a very strong case to be made that he should be a starting outfielder next year. Jeremiah Jackson is obviously not somebody that we had in our 2026 plans entering the season, given the fact that he was not in the organization. He was a free agent minor league signing who lit the world on fire in Norfolk. Now he comes up here. Granted, Ramon Arias was under team control for 2026. So would there have been a need for a Jeremiah Jackson if Ramon Arias doesn't get traded? Probably not. Maybe there's a similar case to be made for Dylan Beavers in 2026. If Ramon Laureano doesn't get traded and you keep him under team control next year, is there a need for Dylan Beavers in a corner outfield? I don't know. But
also Heston Kjerstad, no one would have ever expected his season to go as how it has gone. And he was someone that we were talking about as a fourth, fifth outfielder option for all of 2025.
Yeah, that's fair too, right? A lot of these calculations have changed. The starting rotation, I think, maybe you even feel better about for 26 than you thought you would, given the fact that you have Rogers. Kyle Bradish has come back and looked good. You feel a little bit worse about the Grayson Rodriguez situation, but hopefully he comes back next year and is healthy. The bullpen, I think, is a massive question mark, and it is one that we are going to surely talk about next week in terms of the Orioles' offseason plans and what they need to do. Felix Bautista goes down with injury, and you trade 4 other bullpen arms. That's a lot of production to have to replace in 2026. Position player-wise, we know the position player core is going to be here, and they are going to be the foundation of this thing. The 2026 season, much like the 2025 season, will fall on the shoulders of how Adley Rutschman, Jackson Holliday, Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westberg, Colton Cowser play.
And leadership is still a huge need from this young core.
Yep.
I still think
whether that's internal or external.
Right, exactly. And whether, you had that from Ryan O'Hearn. He became a very vocal leader in this clubhouse. Cedric Mullins was a bit quieter than O'Hearn, but was one of those guys as a veteran with O'Hearn to kind of take up that leadership role. And then obviously after the trade deadline, things are different. But you expected from the start of 2025 Gunnar and Adley to pick up bigger leadership roles as is. So 2026, that nothing's changed on that front as well.
Right. Well, there's 5 games left in the season, and the Orioles obviously will not be playing into October, unfortunately. As we wrap up here for the regular season, I think I am still left feeling as if I am watching a team with an injured quarterback.
Yeah.
Where, there are question marks elsewhere. There are issues elsewhere, and those issues need to be addressed, and they need to be figured out. The Orioles tied an MLB record for players used in a single season with 70. Much of their young core that you were expecting to have huge seasons from, sure, they underperformed at times, but they also played about half the season.
Yeah.
So what does that evaluation look like? I don't know if there is a good evaluation to put on this 2025 season other than the fact that it is disappointing. How much do injuries contribute? How much does underperformance contribute? On a micro scale, on an individual player scale, you can have that argument too, right? For somebody that played 80 games and underperformed in those 80 games, how much of it is the fact that they underperformed in those 80 games? How much of it is the fact that they were injured for the other 80 and couldn't find a rhythm in the 80 that they were playing? I don't know the exact answer to all of those particular situations with all of those specific players, because injuries lead to rhythm issues, to mechanical issues, to a whole litany of things. So to what extent each of those 2 factors played a role in this season, I don't know. But I know what the 2 factors are. It's injuries and underperformance.
Yeah, and I think that September is a very interesting month in baseball, obviously, because you have the teams that are hoping to play their best month of baseball in September to make a playoff push, and then you also have the teams that aren't going to make the playoffs at all, but in a sense, September is still really, really important to have to play your best month of baseball, see where you're going to look in 2026, go into the offseason on the best note possible. I mean, even just 3 of the last 4 months for the Orioles have been winning months. And that's huge. I mean, in June, 16-11 record, July, 13-12. August was the one non-winning record of those 4, 11-17. And then September, you're 13-7. The division records this month, the Yankees are 13-7 in September. The Orioles are 13-7. Blue Jays are 11-9. Red Sox 10-9, and Rays 9-12.
Yeah, the Yankees have been the best team in baseball for the last month.
Yeah, but the Orioles are right up there with the same record.
Right.
So you would much rather, yes, I know you're not making a playoff push, which is where they were supposed to be right now, but you might as well play the best baseball of the season going into the into the off season.
Yeah, 3 of the last 4 months you play winning baseball. You just can't start 16 games under 500. And obviously that is a takeaway from this season as well. Not breaking any news there. That you can't start a season that slow, and even if you do play good baseball down the stretch, that's a big hole to climb out of. And unfortunately, the Orioles weren't able to do that this year, and it concludes with a disappointing 2025 that still has plenty of promise for 2026 and leading into the offseason. But I think that'll just about do it for this week's edition of the Bird's Nest, the last 2025 baseball season edition of the Bird's Nest. Next week, we are going to start our initial off-season conversation. That off-season conversation doesn't really start until after the playoffs conclude. So next week will be our last podcast for a bit. It'll be probably our only podcast of the month of October, because we will be back after that, after the World Series. Once the offseason officially begins, we will have plenty of off-season conversation for you with what the Orioles should be doing, will be doing, could potentially be doing, other synonyms for things that they are doing. So we will talk to you one more time next week before a break here in October. Thank you for following along with us live on YouTube and Facebook. We are live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. on those 2 platforms, or you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us here on the Bird's Nest. Big thank you to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one. For Annie Claff, I am Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch